Hello, thanks for joining us today for our second film from PorkBellyFilms. Today we're going to do something a little bit different from last week's slightly more technical video. We're going to do a kind of travel photo retrospective of a trip that I took to Hong Kong back in January and February. Obviously this was back when you were allowed to actually go outside and to travel anywhere. So it's been a little while, but the photos I think are quite interesting, so I thought it was definitely worth still having a look at some of them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the equipment that I've used to create it, so the cameras, and I'll have a little chat about the film as well. While we're doing that, I'll also give you a few travel tips. We've picked up some really interesting locations while we were there, some really interesting little places, and the odd kind of restaurant and bar as well that I'll shout out because there was some particularly good food and drink we had as well. So yeah, let's have a little run through. I think the first thing to talk about then is the cameras that I used, and something I really want to try to get across in this video is that it isn't necessary to have super expensive equipment in order to get good results from film photography. You don't need a Nikon F3 or a Contax T2, you know, all of those things you see on Instagram that people are using all the time, which, you know, there are great cameras, but there's loads and loads and loads of really good cameras that you can get great results with without having to shell out massive amounts of money. The first one, so this is something that took probably 75-80% of the shots here, is this one, which is a Yashica Electro 35. So it's an old school aperture priority. This one I think cost me 15 quid, something like that on eBay. It did come broken, so I had to repair some bits inside of it, which I can do a little video on if people are interested in. But even a fully working one's not going to set you back any more than kind of 80 to 100 quid, and it's a really great lens, 45mm f1.7, and large amounts of the shots from this video, yeah, I'd probably say about 60-70% were taken on this one. The other camera that I used a lot of when I was in Hong Kong was a Nikon FM with a 50mm 1.8. I subsequently sold that camera, but again, that's an excellent camera, and it's one of those ones again that shows you don't need an F3 to be able to get into that Nikon system. There are some fantastic bodies out there that do a really good job as well. I think the next really interesting bit that we need to talk about is the films that I actually used whilst I was on this trip. I made use of two films predominantly, and then there's a third film I used a little bit of. The film that I made greatest use of was this one, which is Fuji Industrial 100. It's a really nice colour C41 film. It's got a really lovely palette. It's a little bit more common in Japan and the rest of Asia than it is over here in Europe. You can still get it. It's much cheaper in Japan as well. But it's a fantastic film, really lovely colours. And I believe you can get it in the UK, but as I said, it'll cost you a few extra quid. The next film probably doesn't need too much of an introduction, as I think basically every film YouTuber's made a video about it, is Cinestill 800T. So, I mean, the great advantage for me for this, and you'll see a lot of the night shots are done with Cinestill 800T, is the fact that it is 800 speed. So, you know, you've got lots and lots of latitude if you don't have much light. To me, I do really like the colours though. I mean, the halation can be interesting, sometimes a little bit much. It can depend on the situation, but I think you can get some really interesting shots with it. The final film that I used was Ilford Ortho Plus 80, which is an orthochromatic film, essentially meaning that it isn't sensitive to red and orange light. The consequence of that is that if you take a photo with anything that's red in it, or very dark orange, it will come out very black. I used this on one day when it was particularly sunny. Obviously 80 speed films are going to need a lot of light, and I thought the results were actually really interesting and quite nice. So we'll have a little look at that, and we'll have a chat you through how I made use of that film as well. So the first location we're going to have a look at is a place called Sai Kung, which is out kind of in the far east of Hong Kong. So it's a little bit further out. It's a little bit more rural. It's part of the New Territories. It's so peaceful and lovely out there. We went there because my family, there's the house there that we stay in. So peaceful and lovely. So it's kind of like an old fishing village. There's a lot of history to Sai Kung. It's perhaps not as old as some of the other places in Hong Kong, but it's a really nice, lovely place. It's quite common to see a fair amount of expats as well, and also a massive amount of dogs. So we'll have a look at a couple of dog shots as well, because I couldn't resist the odd cute dog. It is a nice place. It's a little bit further out, so you're not going to be able to get the MTR. You have to get the little public light buses. So it takes a little bit of time to get there, but for me, it's definitely worth the journey if you don't happen to be going there anyway. Thinking about then, like the first photo that I took there is this shot here of the boat coming into the harbour. This was on the Nikon FM with the Fuji Industrial 100. I really, really, really like the way this picture came out. I think as the sun's just kind of gently setting in the background, it just casts a really beautiful light over the photo. The composition I think is pretty good. I mean, it's not the most incredible one. I think it's more about the light here than the composition side of it. I like as well some of the little details that I only noticed afterwards. You know, the people, for example, in the boat that's coming in on the bottom left, you can actually see them quite well as the sunlight comes through. So this is an image that I was really, really happy with, actually. It was just as I was having a walk around one evening. But I was very pleased with how that one came out. The next image that I'd like to show you guys is kind of, I guess it's street photography, although I suppose it's more harbour photography. Is this shot of a family fishing from the harbour. I think this one works nice from a compositional perspective. I happened to get everyone standing in a nice place when I was taking the photos, so it comes out really nicely to me. I like how it comes together. I think it's just a nice capture of a kind of family moment as well, you know, with some of the kids hanging over the side and looking, trying to, you know, spot the fish as the siblings are fishing for it. Again, I just liked how this came together, and I like the colours of it. And I think this shot and the one before really show what Fuji Industrial 100 can look like if you kind of, you know, use it in the right conditions, which is nice light. Although, having said that, I have used it with flash before, and it can work quite nicely with flash. But this one is completely naturally lit. Coming on to the next photo then. I mean, I still think it's one of those incredible photos, but it is very, very cute. The time that we were in Hong Kong was around Chinese New Year. It's very common in Chinese New Year for people to give each other money in red envelopes, kind of as a token, and to bring, you know, luck in the new year. What I loved about this is that the shop owner had set his little dog up to collect the red envelopes, which in Cantonese are lacy, and in Mandarin the envelopes are called hongbei, and you know, you could pet the little dog and put a little envelope in there as well. And look in his bag, he was actually doing all right as it came for money, so he was earning well for his shop owner. So the next location I want to have a chat about is a little bit closer into kind of the city proper of Hong Kong, which is Lion's Rock. So it's a really famous landmark in Hong Kong. It's about, I think it's about 490, 500 meters high. And it gets its name from the fact that from a distance it looks like a crouching lion. It's a really, really, really super nice hike. It can be quite hard work on a really hot day because the last bit up is a bit of a grind. But it is really, 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 really nice. I mean, we even saw some people doing it in high heels, which I probably wouldn't recommend. But it's a really nice hike, and you get beautiful views over the city, and you can even see Hong Kong Island in the distance. So I'd highly recommend that. As you're walking up, you'll see, this is the first picture from there. As you're walking up, you'll see some little monkeys, all of which there are many, many signs saying don't touch or feed them because they are pretty aggressive. This one kind of posed a little bit for me, which was they're generous of me and didn't try and bite my face off, which I also enjoyed. Again, this is the Electro 35, and this is with Fuji 100. Really nice green tones, I think, you know, they're almost a little bit like Fuji Pro 400H, but not quite perhaps as saturated. But I really like this. I thought it came out really, really nicely. As you're walking up as well, you get lots of little views like this, which again, I don't think is necessarily the most incredible picture from a kind of compositional perspective, but I think it really speaks to how kind of Lion Rock feels as you're walking up. As you go further and further up, you can see all of the little buildings nestled into the mountainside, kind of just enveloped by that greenery. Again, I really, really, really enjoyed this hike. This was probably about 2/3 of the way up before it really, really starts to grind at the top. But yeah, I think that's just a nice picture that I'm a fan of. This last one it's interesting because on a very clear day you can get this view essentially completely uninterrupted by fog, and it's much, much clearer than this. But in a lot of ways I actually quite like the fog in this one, and this is one of the few of my own images that I've actually printed out to put up in our living room. So again, this is from the very, very top of Lion Rock, and as you can see, you know, the haze is crazy bad on the day we were going up, but you can still see just the structure of Hong Kong and all of the massive high-rises. Again, you can also pick out the colours of them as well. You know, you've got some lovely kind of pink ones as well in there amongst the grey. A fan of this shot. Again, as I say, if you wanted it without any of the kind of, you know, hot fog in it, you could pick a day that was perhaps a little bit less misty. But personally, I'm quite a big fan of the look for that. So the next location I'm going to talk to you about, I'm going to kind of combine two areas, Kowloon and Central, which is from Hong Kong Island. The reason is that although they are separated by Victoria Harbour, together they kind of form the sort of main core of Hong Kong, really. It's where a lot of the offices are. There's quite a lot of housing there as well, so it's kind of something that we can think a little bit about together. As I say, Victoria Harbour goes along the north shore of Hong Kong Island, and that's where some of the, well, in fact most of the daytime shots we're going to look at come from. Most of the nighttime shots, however, come from Kowloon itself, which is just kind of the areas north and around Tsim Sha Tsui MTR station. So I'll talk you through those and we'll have a look at some of those images. I think the first one that I really liked, and I think this is one of my all-time favourite images from this trip, and actually from a lot of trips, is this one here, this guy fishing from Victoria Harbour. I think there's a lot of reasons I liked it. I think on the day the weather worked really well with Fuji Industrial 100, and it gave it like a really nice colour palette. It's also kind of quite isolating. The guy looks quite alone while he's doing the fishing, and I think that kind of speaks to the mood that Hong Kong was in when we were there. I mean, after all of the riots from the end of 2019, when we arrived in kind of January, February 2020, you know, there was the aftermath of that as well, which had really hurt tourism. But on top of that, obviously this was just when COVID was beginning to kind of develop. We were actually supposed to go to mainland China on this trip, but we weren't able to because of restrictions, which turned out to probably be a sensible thing. But Hong Kong itself was so empty. You know, this area is normally absolutely packed, but it was much quieter than normal, and there was a real sense of kind of quiet and peace and calm, but also sort of a strange, eerie kind of isolation, which I sort of really feel that this picture came across, both in how he's positioned himself, but also in the kind of tone as well, from the colours in the image. So I was a big fan of this one. Speaking, I think, more to that kind of theme of how quiet it was, this is walking down towards the main financial district buildings along the north shore of Hong Kong Island, so through Victoria Harbour and Central. Again, this path would normally be absolutely rammed. I mean, this was about lunchtime on a working day, so normally this would be full of office workers eating their lunch, but it was just completely dead. There was just these two people walking through what would normally be an incredibly busy area. And again, I think it's a combination of the colours, but I also think the framing of this one actually turned out quite nice. This is from the Nikon FM actually, so I was very happy with how this looked. I think it comes out really clean, but I also think it tells a lot about how Hong Kong felt at that time as well. Here we're starting to kind of fall into night, so this is kind of dusk time. So this is again in Central, so this is up near a few of the kind of bar restaurant areas. This place is kind of like a little intersection, but it's a place where a lot of taxis come up, and the taxis in Hong Kong, in a kind of similar way to Japan, are often quite old school vehicles, which can lend a really interesting look to images. It gives it a kind of sort of odd, almost kind of vintage, timeless feel. You probably noticed a fair shift in the colour palette, and that's because I've moved to Cinestill 800T by this point. So this is from the Yashica Electra 35. This one I feel is just kind of what I would like Cinestill to look like. It's that kind of cinematic look, looking like a still from a film. You've got a little bit of halation from some of the street lights, but it's nothing too extreme, and it's picking up some of the neon in the background. But this is a shot I was a big fan of. It to me feels like a still from a film that I'd really enjoy watching. This is coming over to the Kowloon side, so we were walking around Kowloon. This was just a quick moment that I captured of this person having her fortune told. And I liked it because it was very sort of different from a lot of the images you see in Hong Kong. You often see all of the bright lights, you see the big buildings, you see the city. But you don't often see kind of people's day-to-day small interactions. So I really like this shot. Again, Cinestill, it's got that typical green look to it here, which is kind of exacerbated by the fact that the lighting in that area was quite sort of cool anyway. But I really like how this came out. I think compositionally, I probably could have done some things a little bit differently. It's quite bright on that right-hand side of the frame where the lighting from the street is kind of bleeding in. But I think it's still quite an interesting photo. I think possibly my favourite photo from the whole trip though is this one, which again is from the same night as the photo I just showed you, where we were out wandering around Kowloon, seeing what we could see really. And this one, I love how Cinestill's rendered the colours in it. I think you get a little bit of halation from that sign, but it's not too much. And the sign really lights up the concrete around it. You can still really clearly see people eating at the counter underneath. I mean, to be honest, I was mostly just happy that this exposed right, because I used the Yashica Electro 35 here, which is aperture priority, so I didn't have that much control over exposure, but managed to get that to come out pretty well actually, so I was really, really happy with that. And it's quite nice and sharp as well. So this is probably my favourite image. I've used this one quite a lot in quite a few sort of presentations and little talks and things, so I am a big fan of this photo. This is kind of on a similar theme, but it's not quite perhaps as nice as the first two, but I wanted to include it just for the fact that it's almost completely out of focus, but you can make out enough that it's interesting. And I'm not one of those people who kind of tries to, you know, take things out of focus or to get light leaks and things like that. You know, I'm not a believer that just because you've taken it on film, it has to kind of have lots of imperfections in it. But this one, I think the lack of focus actually kind of helped it a little bit, and again, it gives it that quite sort of cinematic still feeling to it. But I like this photo, as I say. I don't think it's technically as good as the other two, but it is quite interesting, and I really enjoy kind of how the image comes along. This is more of a quick plug actually for somewhere that we really enjoyed, rather than it particularly being the nicest photo I've ever taken. So Shady Acres is a kind of like little bar and restaurant which is up in Central. I'll put the link in the description for the location. Absolutely delicious food, fantastic wine. We had a vegan burger there. I think it was an Impossible Meat one, which was so good. My wife didn't actually believe it was vegan burger and thought I was lying to her. Neither of us are vegans, but that was absolutely delicious and I really enjoyed that. So if you're around that area, I think Shady Acres is a great place to check out, and they have delicious wine as well. So the next place I want to talk to you about is somewhere that's very kind of far off the normal sort of touristy route in Hong Kong, but definitely worth going to if you can spare the time to get there. It's a temple called Wan Chun Sun Kun, which is in very sort of northeast. You're actually far closer to Shenzhen than you are to Hong Kong itself. It's a beautiful place. It's a Taoist temple that was built about late 1930s, early 1940s. The monks that built the temple actually originally lived in Guangdong in China, but when Japanese forces invaded China in 35-36, they had to leave, so they fled to Hong Kong. And one of the first things they did was to build a replica of their old temple here. So it's a very peaceful place. It's really beautiful. So I'd recommend making the trip. I'll put a little link to the location of it in the description, because it's not always necessarily the easiest place to find. To give you an idea of what it looks like, we'll have a look at a couple of images from there. These are the photos that I took with the Ilford Ortho 80. So they're all black and white, and you can see here how the red in the temple looks so black kind of behind the characters, you know, in the nameplates. It's jet black, even though it was actually red when we got there, and a lot of the red elements look far darker, whereas the greenery looks really nice and crisp. I really like this film actually. It's a different look. It's nice and sharp though if you've got enough light, but as I say, it renders in really nice colours for me. Well, not colours, obviously black and white, but the colours render nicely in black and white. So I like this. It's nice and sharp. You know, it's not the most interesting photo in the world, but I think it goes to show how peaceful a temple it is as well. I think the next image also kind of tries to convey how peaceful it is as well. And I think this is why somewhere like this is a really interesting place to go if you're in Hong Kong, because it's a little bit different. It's not the kind of classic hustle and bustle of Hong Kong as it's kind of seen. You know, it's a big financial district, huge international city. This is kind of peaceful and calm and relaxing, and it's a very kind of different side to Hong Kong. As I said, this is not really about food, and you know, neither me nor my wife are vegan, but the Taoist temple does have a vegan menu as well, and it serves some of the most incredible food that I've ever tasted, vegan or not. Interestingly, they also sell PBR, which seems a bit odd as a Taoist temple's beer of choice, but there it is. It's an absolutely delicious set of food. So you can see from these two, well, these are just quick snaps from my phone rather than anything particularly fancy, just how good it looks. There's mock duck there. On the sort of the second photo, the bottom right corner is a kind of sort of tofu fish, but it tasted absolutely incredible. Bottom left is kind of a faux shrimp. But again, absolutely amazing. The taste was incredible, and I think if you are vegan or if you're eating less meat, this kind of stuff's a great place to look for inspiration. I always find it really interesting that kind of vegan food and how to make vegan food taste nice is something that's relatively kind of new in the West, but people have been doing it for hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years in the East and in China and in Hong Kong. So it's worth checking out these kind of things if you're interested in food, as I am. You know, that's another big passion of mine. But the food here was absolutely excellent. So the final location I want to talk to you about is a very, very, very specific place where you can go to find fantastic used cameras. Almost entirely old film cameras, although they do have the occasional digital one as well. Big Head Taco is a fantastic, really inspirational YouTuber. He does a great video on Champagne Court, which I think if you look for that, you'll find far more information than I can provide. But it's just to let you know that is it actually a fantastic place. So I went down there, Champagne Court, to have a look around and see what I could see. I mean, this is just a shot of the kind of looking up the stairway into Champagne Court. It's kind of like a mecca for film users. It's very inviting, kind of draws you in to look at all the various goods that they have on hand. Sadly, I wasn't feeling the greatest. I'd had a wee bit of a bad pint the night before. I did not feel particularly great, so I didn't actually get to look around that much, which is definitely something I'll be rectifying next time we go to Hong Kong. While I was there, I think there's just a couple of quick phone snaps to show you the kind of stuff you can get. You can obviously get film, picked up a couple of rolls of Cinestill and one of Pro 400H, which I still haven't used actually, that's still in the fridge, but an excellent selection. And then I saw this absolutely beautiful Nikon S3 in just incredible condition. Obviously, I didn't have the spare cash to be getting it while I was out there, but I think if I have the money next time I go spare, that's definitely something like that I'd be looking at. It's beautiful, beautiful. One thing you'll notice if you hang around this channel is that although I do have non-rangefinders, rangefinder cameras are kind of the thing that I really, really like. My main camera at the minute is a Fuji GS645S, which is a medium format rangefinder. So rangefinders and, that sort of look to cameras I really, really, really like. But yeah, this was a bit of sort of gear lust here, but I managed to rein it in and be a little bit sensible that day. Well, hopefully that gave you some inspiration, and hopefully it kind of showed you a little bit of the kind of images that I like to take, the sort of style that I like, and maybe gave you the odd little tip on what you could have a look out for when you're in Hong Kong next. Yeah, stay safe, and I will catch you next week where we'll probably do a similar travel photo retrospective, but this time in Japan.